The evening Alessio Romani chose his date for his sister's wedding, he didn't pick a Mafia princess, a politician's daughter, or one of the socialites who threw themselves at him. He stood in his penthouse overlooking the city and made a call to a woman nobody expected. Ambra Cocci stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in her red dress, watching the city lights blur into streams of gold and crimson. She had come here thinking this was just another meeting, another negotiation in a life built on careful moves and calculated risks. She was wrong. Alessio Romani never made impulsive decisions. He never showed emotion, and he never explained himself to anyone. The penthouse was silent except for the distant hum of the city below and the soft clink of ice in crystal glasses. It was early evening, and the sky was bleeding purple and orange over the skyline. Ambra had been waiting for 10 minutes, trying to maintain the composure she always wore like armor. She liked staying in control. She liked knowing exactly where she stood, but tonight control was slipping through her fingers like water. Alessio emerged from the shadows of the hallway, still wearing the tailored black suit from whatever meeting had consumed his afternoon. His jacket was gone, his white shirt crisp against his skin, sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing the expensive watch that caught the dying light. His neck tattoo, dark, intricate, dangerous, curved from beneath his collar like a warning written in ink. His hair was perfectly styled, his jaw set in that way that made grown men nervous, and his eyes were locked on her with an intensity that made her pulse hammer in her throat. "Miss Cocci," he said, his voice low and certain, cutting through the silence like a blade. She turned fully to face him, her red dress catching the light, her heart racing though her expression remained perfectly calm. "Mr. Romani." He moved closer, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them with the confidence of a man who owned everything he looked at. His gaze traveled over her not with lust, but with assessment, as if seeing something in her that nobody else had noticed. "You're coming with me to my sister's wedding," he said. Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Ambra's breath caught. For a moment, the entire world narrowed to just him, just those words, just the impossible thing he was asking. Her fingers tightened slightly against the fabric of her dress, the only sign that his words had landed like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Alessio stopped just 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the danger radiating from him like heat. "You heard me." Behind them, Rossi Lorenzo, Alessio's right-hand man, and the only other person in the room, made a sound that might have been shock or objection. Alessio didn't even glance his way. His attention remained fixed on Ambra with a focus that felt like being caught in a spotlight, exposed and seen in ways that terrified her. "I don't." Ambra started, then stopped, because what could she possibly say? That she didn't belong in his world? That bringing her to a family wedding would cause chaos? That everyone would know she wasn't one of them? "You don't have to understand," Alessio said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "You just have to say yes." The way he looked at her in that moment, possessive, determined, almost reverent, told Ambra that this decision had already been made. This wasn't about asking permission. This was about him claiming something he wanted, and what Alessio Romani wanted, he took. She should have said no. She should have walked out that door and never looked back. But something in his eyes held her frozen, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he saw in her the same dangerous edges she recognized in him. "Why me?" she whispered. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of a shared secret. "Because you're the only woman in this city who looks at me and doesn't pretend to be something she's not. If you're already hooked by this dangerous romance, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you're watching from, and where in the world are you? I love knowing my audience. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. The evening sun bled across the city skyline, painting everything in shades of crimson and gold. Alessio stood by the windows of his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, watching the light die. The decision had been made hours ago, maybe days, maybe the moment he first saw her. It didn't matter when. What mattered was that it was final, irreversible, and would change everything. He heard her before he saw her, the soft click of heels against marble, the whisper of fabric moving with her body. Ambra appeared in the doorway, and for a moment, the dying sun caught her in its last light, turning her red dress into living flame. The color was bold, dangerous, the shade of blood and passion and warnings ignored. It clung to her curves like a second skin, elegant and provocative in equal measure, and when she moved deeper into the room, the air itself seemed to shift. Alessio turned slowly, deliberately, letting his gaze travel over her with an intensity that bordered on possession. She didn't flinch. Most people did when he looked at them like that, as if he could see straight through skin and bone to the truth underneath. But Ambra held his stare, her chin lifted slightly, defiance and something darker flickering in her eyes. "You wanted to see me," she said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. "I did." He set the glass down, the sound sharp in the quiet. "You're coming with me to my sister's wedding." The words landed like a physical blow. He watched her absorb them, saw the slight widening of her eyes, the way her fingers curled into her palms. "Excuse me." "You heard me." He moved toward her, each step measured, predatory. "Saturday. You'll be on my arm when I walk through those doors." Ambra's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought he might hear it. This wasn't a request. This was Alessio Romani doing what he always did, taking what he wanted and daring anyone to stop him. That's not possible." "It is." He stopped close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and dark, could see the precise line of his jaw and the way his neck tattoo disappeared beneath his collar like a secret written on his skin. "It's already decided." "By you," she said, finding her voice even as her pulse raced. "Not by me." His lips curved, not quite a smile, something more dangerous. "Tell me you don't want to." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to something intimate and threatening all at once. "Tell me the thought of walking into that world on my arm doesn't make your blood run hot." Ambra opened her mouth to lie, to say exactly that, but the words died in her throat. Because he was right. Despite everything, the danger, the impossibility, the fact that entering his world could destroy her, something in her wanted this. Wanted him. The realization terrified her more than anything he could have threatened. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yes." He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jaw with unexpected gentleness. "Say yes, Ambra." The way he said her name made it sound like a prayer and a curse. She looked into his eyes and saw the same dangerous fire that burned in her own chest, the same reckless need that defied logic and survival instinct. "Yes," she heard herself say, sealing both their fates. Rossi Lorenzo had served Alessio Romani for 8 years, through wars and betrayals, through blood spilled and empires built. He'd learned to read his boss's moods like weather patterns, to anticipate decisions before they were spoken. But nothing could have prepared him for this. "You're taking who to the wedding?" Rossi's voice came out strangled, disbelieving. Alessio didn't turn from where he stood, his gaze following Ambra as she moved toward the windows, putting distance between herself and the conversation she knew was coming. "You heard me, boss." Rossi stepped forward, lowering his voice to something urgent, almost pleading. "You can't be serious. We don't know enough about her. Where she comes from, who she's connected to, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. Your enemies will see this as weakness. They'll use her against you." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Alessio turned slowly, and the look he gave Rossi would have made lesser men step back. "Are you questioning me?" "I'm trying to protect you." Rossi held his ground, loyal enough to risk his boss's anger. "This woman, we've only known her for 3 weeks. There are procedures, background checks, family approvals. Your mother will. My mother, Alessio said, his voice soft and deadly, doesn't make my decisions. Across the room, Ambra stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath her like a kingdom made of light and shadow. She'd gone still at the mention of enemies and weakness, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. But she didn't turn around, didn't insert herself into the confrontation. She simply stood there, proud and quiet, letting them discuss her fate as if she were a chess piece being moved across a board. Alessio's hand moved unconsciously toward her, a gesture so instinctive he didn't seem to realize he'd done it. Look at her, Rossi. Boss, I don't. Look at her. Rossi turned, reluctant, and for the first time really saw what Alessio saw. Ambra turned from the window then, the city lights framing her like something both celestial and damned, a dangerous angel who'd fallen not from heaven, but from somewhere darker. Her red dress caught the light, her face partially in shadow, and her eyes held something that made Rossi's objections catch in his throat. There was no fear in those eyes. No pleading for acceptance or desperate hope that they'd approve of her. There was steel there, and fire, and the kind of hard-won strength that came from surviving things that should have broken her. This wasn't a woman who would crumble under the weight of the Romani family's scrutiny or their enemies' threats. This was a woman who'd already walked through her own hell and come out the other side with her spine straight and her head high. She doesn't flinch, Alessio said quietly, his gaze never leaving Ambra. Not from me. Not from my world. Not from any of it. Rossi opened his mouth, then closed it. Because he understood now, in that moment, what Alessio had seen from the beginning. This wasn't about choosing someone safe or approved or convenient. This was about choosing someone who matched him fire for fire, darkness for darkness, strength for strength. It's already done, Alessio said with finality. Make the arrangements. The sound of heels against marble echoed through the penthouse like gunfire, sharp and deliberate, a warning before the storm. Alessio's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the only sign he'd heard his mother's arrival. Ambra felt the shift in the room's energy before she saw the woman, a cold front moving in, dangerous and unforgiving. Mrs. Romani swept into the living room as if she owned it, which in many ways she did. Designer everything, Valentino heels, Chanel suit, diamonds that caught the light like shards of ice at her throat and wrists. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her posture rigid with the kind of authority that came from decades of commanding respect through fear and social precision. The moment her eyes landed on Ambra, her expression hardened into something glacial. Alessio. His name came out clipped, controlled fury wrapped in maternal concern. What is this? Mother. Alessio didn't move from where he stood, didn't show even a flicker of surprise at her unannounced intrusion. This is Ambra Cocci. She'll be accompanying me to Isabella's wedding. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mrs. Romani's gaze traveled over Ambra with surgical precision, dissecting every detail, the red dress that was too bold, too sensual for a first family meeting, the confident posture that suggested she wasn't intimidated, the way she held Alessio's mother's stare without dropping her eyes. Who is this woman, Alessio? Mrs. Romani's voice was ice wrapped in silk. Where does she come from? What family? She turned her attention fully to Ambra, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Who are your people, Miss Cocci? I don't have people, Ambra said, her voice steady, meeting the interrogation head-on. Not in the way you mean. So you're nobody. Mrs. Romani's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. My son is taking nobody to his sister's wedding. Do you have any idea what people will say? What this will do to our family's reputation? Mother, Alessio's voice carried a warning, but Mrs. Romani wasn't finished. Does she know what our world is like? Does she understand the danger she's walking into? The expectations? The scrutiny? Her eyes bore into Ambra like daggers. Or did you simply catch my son's eye and think you could play at being something you're not? Ambra felt the words land, felt the calculated cruelty behind them designed to make her small, to make her fold. She'd faced this kind of attack before, different words, different woman, same intention. Make her feel worthless. Make her break. She didn't break. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Romani, Ambra said, her voice quiet but carrying an edge that made the older woman's eyes narrow. I understand that your world is built on appearances and blood. I understand that bringing me to your daughter's wedding breaks your rules. And I understand that you're scared of what that means. The word scared hung in the air like a grenade. Mrs. Romani's face went white, then red, fury flashing across her features. How dare you? That's enough. Alessio's voice cut through the room like a blade, final and absolute. He moved to stand beside Ambra, his presence a wall between her and his mother's wrath. She's coming. This isn't a discussion. Mrs. Romani looked between them, seeing something in her son's face that made her stiffen. You're making a mistake. My mistake to make. The library was dark except for the city lights bleeding through the windows, casting everything in shades of blue and silver. Ambra stood with her forehead pressed against the cool glass, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking now that she was alone. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped her arms around herself, the red dress suddenly feeling like armor that had failed. She didn't hear Alessio enter. He moved through his own space like a ghost when he wanted to, silent and observing. He found her there, silhouetted against the glittering sprawl of the city, and something in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself together through sheer force of will, made him stop. You should have told me, he said quietly, that my mother would be the easy part. Ambra's laugh was broken, bitter. Your mother is terrifying. She's supposed to be. He moved closer, his footsteps soft on the Persian rug. But you've faced worse. It wasn't a question. Ambra closed her eyes, her breath fogging the glass. You don't know what I faced. Then tell me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. When Ambra finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was married once. To a man who, she stopped, swallowed hard. To a man who thought love meant ownership. Who thought my fear was proof of his power. Alessio went very still behind her. Listening. Not interrupting. I tried to leave 3 times. Each time, he found me. Each time, it got worse. Her fingers pressed against the window, leaving ghostly prints. The 4th time, I didn't run. I fought back. And when it was over, he wasn't breathing anymore, and I was covered in his blood. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrible. Ambra waited for disgust, for judgment, for the inevitable moment when Alessio would realize she was damaged beyond repair. Instead, she felt him move closer, his presence a wall of heat at her back. Where is he now? Alessio's voice was soft, dangerous. Buried. Quietly. His family, they're connected. Powerful. If they find me, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. They won't. 2 words, spoken with absolute certainty. Ambra turned then, and found him closer than she expected, his face partially in shadow. You don't understand. These people, they have reach, they have resources. So do I. His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness that made her breath catch. You think I don't recognize survival when I see it? You think I don't know what it looks like when someone's had to kill to stay alive? His touch was tender, almost reverent, and somehow more dangerous than any threat he could have made. Because this gentleness from a man who dealt in violence, was the most terrifying thing of all. It made her want to believe. It made her want to trust. I'm not afraid of your past, Ambra, he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I'm afraid of losing you to it. The vulnerability in those words, the raw honesty, cracked something open inside her. She leaned into his touch without meaning to, and when his other hand came up to frame her face, she didn't pull away. Why? She whispered. Why choose this? Why choose me? His answer was to close the distance between them, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the darkness. Because you're the only real thing in my world. Mrs. Romani made the first call before her driver had even pulled away from Alessio's building. Her fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced precision, dialing a number she reserved for situations that required discretion and results. I need everything, she said without preamble when the line connected. Ambra Cocci. Every detail, where she's from, who her family is, what she's running from. I want to know what my son doesn't. She paused, listening, then added with ice in her voice, and I want it before the wedding. The investigator on the other end knew better than to ask questions. Mrs. Romani paid well and expected miracles. Within hours, a network of informants, private investigators, and well-connected associates were pulling at threads, searching databases, making calls to contacts in cities across the country. But Mrs. Romani wasn't the only one asking questions. In a dimly lit restaurant across the city, Marco De Luca sat with his lieutenants, a photograph of Alessio and Ambra spread across the table between whiskey glasses and cigar smoke. The image had been taken outside the penthouse, Alessio's hand at the small of her back, Ambra in that red dress that screamed confidence and danger. Who is she? Marco asked, his eyes narrowing on the woman's face. Nobody knows, one of his men replied. She appeared 3 weeks ago. No family ties we can find, no connections to any of the families. But Romani's taking her to his sister's wedding. Marco smiled, slow and predatory. Interesting. Alessio Romani doesn't do anything without calculation. Either she's important, or he's getting sloppy. He tapped the photograph. Find out which. And find out how we can use her. At the penthouse, Rossi Lorenzo stood in Alessio's office, tension radiating from every line of his body. Boss, we have a problem. Alessio looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing, his expression unreadable. Only one. They're asking questions. About her. About you. Rossi moved closer, lowering his voice. Your mother has investigators digging into Ambra's past. De Luca's people are asking around. Even the Corsini family wants to know who she is. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. This makes you vulnerable, boss. They see her as a weakness they can exploit. Alessio set down his pen with deliberate calm, leaning back in his chair. The city stretched out behind him through the windows, his kingdom laid out in lights and shadows. And we should consider. No, the word was final, absolute. Rossi pressed on, loyal enough to risk his boss's anger. They'll come after her. You know they will. The moment they think they can hurt you through her. Let them try. Alessio's voice was cold, dangerous, carrying the weight of every brutal decision he'd ever made. Let them ask their questions. Let them circle and scheme and think they've found my weakness. Boss. Alessio stood, moving to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. She's mine, Rossi. That's all they need to know. And anyone who tries to use that against me? He turned, and the look in his eyes was lethal. I'll make an example of them that this city won't forget. Rossi studied his boss's face and saw something he'd never seen before, not just determination, but possession bordering on obsession. Alessio Romani had built an empire on control and calculated moves. But this woman in red had made him willing to risk it all. Understood, boss, Rossi said quietly. I'll double her security detail. Triple it. The transformation began the morning after Mrs. Romani's visit, but it wasn't the kind Alessio's mother would have expected or approved. There were no etiquette coaches or deportment lessons, no attempts to sand down Ambra's edges into something palatable and soft. Instead, Rossi Lorenzo sat across from her in the penthouse's dining room, a dossier spread between them like a map of a minefield. The Corsini family, he said, tapping a photograph. Smile, nod, but never turn your back. They've been trying to move into Romani territory for 2 years. Ambra studied the faces, committing them to memory. And if they approach me directly? Be polite. Be vague. And find Alessio immediately. Rossi flipped to another page. The De Lucas. Marco especially. He's dangerous, charming, and he'll see you as either an asset or a target. So basically, Ambra said, her voice dry, trust no one. Now you're learning. Alessio watched from the doorway unseen as Ambra absorbed information like a soldier preparing for battle. She asked sharp questions, made mental notes, and didn't flinch when Rossi described the violence that simmered beneath the wedding's elegant surface. Most women would have been terrified. Ambra leaned in closer, her eyes bright with focus. The next day brought Alessandro Mancini, one of Alessio's most trusted associates, who taught her the subtle art of reading a room. Body language tells you everything, he explained, demonstrating how a shifted stance could signal aggression, how a glance could communicate threat. In our world, the real conversations happen in silence. Ambra practiced in front of mirrors, learning to school her expressions, to project confidence while revealing nothing. But unlike someone being molded into a role, she took what worked and discarded what didn't. When Alessandro suggested she might want to appear more demure, more deferential, she fixed him with a look that made even the hardened enforcer pause. I'm not going to that wedding to blend in, she said quietly. I'm going because Alessio chose me. And anyone who thinks I'll apologize for that can go to hell. Alessandro glanced at Alessio, who'd been observing from across the room. The boss's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction, possession, and unmistakably, pride. By the third day, Ambra had memorized faces, alliances, and blood feuds going back decades. She'd learned which families held grudges, which ones were looking for weakness, and which ones might actually be allies. She practiced her responses until they were perfect, polite enough to avoid offense, vague enough to reveal nothing. But she never lost her fire. When one of Alessio's cousins stopped by and made a dismissive comment about the boss's new toy, Ambra's smile was sharp as a knife. Careful, she said sweetly. Toys break easily. I don't. The cousin left quickly, unsettled. That evening, Alessio found Ambra on the balcony, the city spread below her like conquered territory. He moved behind her, his hands settling on the railing on either side of her, caging her in without touching. You're not becoming what they expect, he said, his voice low near her ear. No, she agreed. I'm becoming something they'll fear. His laugh was dark, pleased. Good. His lips brushed her temple, possessive and proud. Show them exactly who you are, Ambra. Make them remember. The attack came on a Tuesday afternoon, in broad daylight, 3 blocks from the penthouse. Ambra had insisted on walking to meet the stylist Alessio had hired, refusing the car he'd offered. She wanted air, space, a moment to feel like herself before the wedding transformed her into something else entirely. She noticed the black sedan when it slowed beside her, the window rolling down with mechanical precision. Professional. Calculated. Wrong. The first man moved fast, grabbing her arm with brutal efficiency, trying to pull her toward the open car door. A kidnapping, clean and quick, meant to send Alessio a message. Your weakness has been identified, and we can take her whenever we want. But Ambra had learned long ago that survival meant being more dangerous than anyone expected. She twisted into the grip instead of away from it, using the attacker's momentum against him. Her elbow connected with his throat, hard and precise, and he staggered back gasping. The second man lunged from the car, and Ambra's training, the self-defense classes she'd taken after her first attempt to leave her husband, the brutal lessons learned in violence and desperation, kicked in with muscle memory sharper than thought. She drove her knee into his solar plexus, grabbed his head, and slammed it against the car door with enough force to crack the window. He crumpled. The first man recovered, pulling a knife, and people on the street started screaming, scattering like birds startled into flight. Ambra didn't run. She circled, her breathing controlled despite her racing heart, every sense heightened. When he lunged, she caught his wrist, twisted until she heard bone crack, and took the knife from his useless hand. She pressed it against his throat, her voice deadly calm. "Who sent you?" His eyes widened, shocked that the target had become the predator. Before he could answer, Alessio's SUV screamed to a stop, tires smoking against pavement. Rossi and 2 other men poured out, but Alessio was faster, rage radiating from him like heat as he took in the scene. The 2 attackers on the ground, Ambra standing with a knife in her hand and fire in her eyes, very much alive. Ambra. Her name came out rough, barely controlled. She turned to him, adrenaline still singing through her veins, and saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Not shock at her violence. Recognition. Pride. And beneath it all, fear, the kind that came from realizing you'd found something you couldn't bear to lose. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands framing her face as he searched for injuries, his touch almost rough with desperate need. "Are you hurt?" No, her voice was steady even as her hands started to shake, delayed reaction setting in. "They wanted to take me. To hurt you through me. They failed." He pulled her against him, not gently but claiming, possessive, his arms like iron around her. His heart hammered against her cheek, his breath harsh in her hair. "Cristo, Ambra." Rossi was already on the phone, calling for cleanup, for answers, for blood. The attackers were being dragged into Alessio's vehicle, their fate sealed. But Alessio didn't move, didn't release her, just held her like she might disappear if he let go. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked against her temple. "From necessity," she whispered. "From survival." His arms tightened. "No one touches you again. Ever." Mrs. Romani's investigator delivered the file at midnight, thick with documentation and photographs that told a story Ambra had tried to bury. By morning, it sat on Alessio's desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. He read it alone in his office, the city waking up beyond his windows, every word reshaping what he thought he knew. Ambra Cocci née Russo. Married at 22 to Dante Martinelli, enforcer for the Martinelli crime family, one of the Romani family's oldest rivals. 3 years of documented hospital visits, each with implausible explanations. Neighbors' statements about screaming, about violence, about a woman who'd stopped smiling. And then, 5 years ago, Dante Martinelli was found dead in their apartment, multiple stab wounds, ruled self-defense after evidence of prolonged abuse surfaced. Ambra had disappeared the same night, leaving behind everything, her name, her life, her connection to a family that would have killed her for what she'd done to one of their own. The office door opened without a knock. Mrs. Romani entered, her face carved from ice and vindication. "Now you see what I see. She's not just nobody, Alessio. She's poison. Connected to our enemies through blood and murder. Get out." His voice was quiet, lethal. "She killed a Martinelli. Do you understand what that means? If they find out she's here with you, it's not just her life at risk, it's war." Mrs. Romani moved closer, pressing her advantage. "You have to end this. Before the wedding. Before it's too late." "I said get out." His mother left, but her words lingered like smoke. Alessio sat with the file open, staring at a photograph of a younger Ambra, bruises barely concealed by makeup, fear in her eyes that she'd learned to hide. He thought about the woman who'd stood over her attackers 3 days ago, knife in hand and fire in her blood. He understood now where that strength came from, what it had cost her. The penthouse was quiet when he found Ambra in the library, staring at the city as she so often did. She turned when he entered, and one look at his face told her everything. "You know." Not a question. "Yes." She wrapped her arms around herself, armor against inevitable rejection. "So now you understand why I can't go to that wedding. Why this was always impossible. The Martinellis will be there. If they recognize me, they won't. Alessio, you don't." "I don't care." He crossed to her, the file still in his hand. I don't care that you were married to a Martinelli. I don't care that you killed him. He deserved worse than what you gave him. And I sure as hell don't care what my mother or the Martinellis or anyone else thinks about it. Ambra's eyes filled, her composure finally cracking. Your family will never accept me. This could start a war. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. Then let there be war. I don't care what you've done, Ambra. I care who you are now. And who you are is mine. That's insane. Yes. His thumb brushed away a tear. Say you'll still come. Say you won't run. She looked at him, this dangerous man who'd chosen her despite everything, who was willing to risk his empire for someone everyone told him was wrong. I'm terrified. Good. So am I. He pulled her close, his lips against her forehead. Be terrified with me. The cathedral was a masterpiece of marble and stained glass, filled with 500 of the most powerful, dangerous people in the city. Old money and blood money sat side by side in designer suits and couture gowns, all pretending this was just a wedding and not a carefully orchestrated display of power and alliance. Alessio's hand rested at the small of Ambra's back as they approached the entrance, his touch both possessive and protective. She could feel the tension in his body, coiled and ready, a predator walking into a den of wolves. Last chance to run, he murmured against her ear. Ambra's laugh was breathless but genuine. And miss this? Never. They stepped through the doors together, and the effect was instantaneous. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned in perfect synchronization. The entire room seemed to inhale as one, shock rippling through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Ambra Cocci, the woman nobody knew, walking on Alessio Romani's arm in a red dress that was nothing short of a declaration of war. The color alone was defiance, bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. It clung to her like liquid fire, elegant and provocative, announcing to everyone that she belonged exactly where she was. Mrs. Romani sat in the front row, her face carved from marble, disapproval radiating from her like cold. Beside her, Alessio's sister Isabella watched with wide eyes, curiosity warring with uncertainty. And scattered throughout the cathedral, members of the Martinelli family sat with carefully neutral expressions, their attention fixed on the woman they didn't yet recognize as one of their ghosts returned to haunt them. Ambra walked with her head high, her hand light on Alessio's arm, meeting every stare with calm confidence. She'd learned in the past week that in this world, hesitation was blood in the water. So she didn't hesitate. She owned every step, every breath, every moment of their scrutiny. They were halfway down the aisle when a voice cut through the whispers, deliberately loud enough to be heard. I suppose standards have changed since my day. The speaker was an older woman, dripping in diamonds and disdain, a distant Romani cousin with too much influence and too little sense. The comment hung in the air like poison. Alessio's jaw tightened, his step faltering as he prepared to respond with the kind of cold fury that would end careers and alliances. But Ambra was faster. She paused, turning slightly toward the woman with a smile that was all sharp edges and perfect poise. Yes, they have, she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. These days, we value authenticity over performance, substance over pedigree, and courage over comfort. Her eyes held the woman's gaze without flinching. I can see why that might be confusing for some. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, quickly suppressed, but unmistakable. The woman's face flushed red, fury and humiliation warring across her features, but she had no response. Ambra had turned the insult back on her with such perfect precision that any further comment would only deepen her own embarrassment. Alessio's hand tightened on Ambra's back, and when she glanced up at him, his lips had curved into something dark and deeply satisfied. Pride blazed in his eyes, possessive and fierce. They continued down the aisle, and this time, the whispers that followed them had changed. Not dismissal. not contempt. Something closer to wary respect, the kind earned through blood or battle, through proving you belonged not because someone allowed it, but because you'd claimed it. When they took their seats, Alessio leaned close, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. That was perfect. Ambra's smile was small but genuine. I learned from the best. The penthouse was dark when they returned, the city lights casting long shadows across the marble floors. The wedding had been a success by any measure. Isabella had been radiant, the families had mingled without bloodshed, and Ambra had proven she could not only survive in Alessio's world, but conquer it. Yet the silence between them was heavy with unspoken knowledge that the real battle was just beginning. Alessio's phone had been vibrating all evening. Messages from his mother, from family members, from associates who'd witnessed Ambra's performance and had opinions about what it meant. He'd ignored them all, but they were piling up like kindling waiting for a match. Ambra stood by the windows, still in her red dress, watching the city with the kind of stillness that spoke of decisions being made. Alessio recognized that stillness. He'd seen it before, in the library when she'd told him about her past. It was the calm before someone ran. Don't. His voice cut through the quiet, sharp and certain. She didn't turn. You don't know what I'm thinking. Yes, I do. He moved toward her, each step deliberate. You're thinking about leaving. About disappearing to spare me the cost of choosing you. Ambra's shoulders tensed, the only sign he'd struck truth. Your mother called me tonight. After the reception. Her voice was steady but thin. She said the Martinellis are asking questions. They're putting together who I am. She said if I care about you at all, I'll leave before this turns into war. And what did you say? Nothing. She finally turned, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears and fierce determination. Because she's right, Alessio. This is going to cost you everything, your family's trust, your alliances, maybe your position. All because you chose someone your world doesn't want you to have. He closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied the violence simmering in his eyes. You think I'm letting you go? You think anything they can do to me is worse than losing you? Alessio. No, his voice was hard, absolute. I've built an empire on fear and control and calculated decisions. I've sacrificed everything personal for power. And the moment you walked into my life, I realized all of that was just a prison I'd built around myself. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You're the only thing that's ever made me feel alive instead of just surviving. This isn't romantic, Ambra whispered. This is dangerous. People will die. Then let them die. His words were a vow of war, dark and certain. Let the Martinellis come. Let my mother scheme. Let every enemy I've ever made think they've found my weakness and try to use it against me. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath harsh. I'll burn this entire city down before I let them take you from me. Ambra's hands came up to grip his wrists, anchoring herself to him. You're insane. Yes. His smile was savage, beautiful. Stay anyway. Fight with me. Choose this, choose us, even though it's going to be hell. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth. Love in their world wasn't soft or safe or gentle. It was a weapon, sharp and dangerous, capable of destroying everything or forging something unbreakable. And she'd spent too long running, too long being afraid. Okay, she breathed. We burn it down together. His kiss was claiming, desperate, full of promises written in violence and passion. When they finally broke apart, Alessio pulled out his phone and made a call. Rossi, he said, his voice cold steel. Call a meeting. All the families. It's time they understood exactly who Ambra Cocci is, and what happens to anyone who threatens what's mine. This story of dangerous love and mafia power captured you. I need you to do 3 things right now. Like this video, share it with everyone who loves intense romance, and subscribe so you never miss another story. And before you go, tell me one more time. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? I love connecting with you all. Drop a comment with your location and let me know what you thought of Alessio and Ambra's story. Should I do more Mafia romance stories? Let me know. See you in the next one.